Right. Good evening, and welcome to tonight's program on rain gardens and other water management techniques for your property with Rebecca Jacobs, Program Manager from the Knox-Lincoln Soil and Water Conservation District. I'm Brenda Harrington, Program Librarian at the Belfast Free Library, and I want to thank you all for joining us. Tonight's program is being recorded and will be on the Belfast Free Library's YouTube channel soon. I want to remind you all to please remain muted during the presentation and type any questions you may have in the chat, and we'll get to them during the Q&A at the end. Before I get to tonight's presentation, I'd like to mention that this program is part of the All of Belfast Climate Dialogues, or ABCD, a multi-year grant-funded project of the Belfast Free Library created to help all residents in our area learn about and talk about climate change impacts in order to help us all prepare for the challenges ahead. I invite you to go to our website, belfastlibrary.org, and follow the link at the top of the page to All of Belfast Climate Dialogues /events to view past programs and learn about future events. And there you will learn that next Thursday, February 9th at 6 p.m., we are hosting a community climate conversation on the future of transportation in Belfast and Wildau County. This will be a hybrid event, and we hope that you will join us. The idea for tonight's program came from another community climate conversation that we had back in October about creating resilience to big storms and flooding. In our discussion about what actions individuals and the community could take together to deal with extreme rain events, the idea of creating rain gardens generated a lot of interest. With this in mind, I reached out to Rebecca Jacobs at the Knox-Lincoln Soil and Water Conservation District and asked her to help us learn more about rain gardens and other water management techniques for our properties. So thank you, Rebecca, so much for joining us and sharing your presentation, and I'll turn the mic over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Brenda, for having me. I see some familiar faces and some new friends, if you will, online. So yep, my name is Rebecca Jacobs, and I am the program manager for the Knox-Lincoln Soil Water Conservation District. And one of the we do, and I'll talk a little bit more about who we are and what we do for those who aren't familiar once I share my screen. Okay, Brenda, can you confirm that you see what I see?
Yes, I can see it.
Okay, just making sure.
Yes.
Yeah, so rain gardens and other water management techniques is the topic. So I will focus the bulk of my time on rain gardens, what they are, how to implement them, how they work, and show you an installation as well as a number of different sample rain gardens. Then I'll talk at the end about some other water management techniques, and we'll go for some Q&A. So without further ado. So let me shrink, oops. Hang on, I gotta bear with me here. I have to move my, oh, sorry, technical difficulty. So what is a conservation district? I think it's always important to start there when people are first coming to programs with the district. We are often confused with the extension service, and though they play an important role, they are actually a partner and not who we are. We are not one and the same. So extensions are attached to the universities and are largely led through the academic research and branch out and are directly attached to that. We are quasi-governmental agencies as a result of the Dust Bowl that serve as non-regulatory community leaders addressing local natural resource issues. We are a tax exempt, again, quasi-governmental agency, not unlike a school district. So we sit in this kind of gray area, if you will. Our mission is to provide assistance in conservation of soil and water resources for our community through proactive efforts, action, as well as through education, such as what we're doing this evening. So in terms of storm, I'm going to have to move this screen here because I can't see my whole screen, sorry. Okay, that's better. In terms of talking about rain gardens, we're essentially talking about stormwater management. And why bother talking about stormwater management? What's the point? Why do we care? We all live in a watershed, and even people living up in Appleton, Liberty, high up on top of the mountain, inland, we often think of, when we think of watersheds, we think of the lower ends of the watershed. But in fact, we all live in a watershed, no matter where we are, because it's all about that area that drains into the nearby lake, stream, or river via ditches over the ground, or even infiltrating through the ground. And so no matter where you are, you live in a watershed. Yes, even in Arizona, in those desert areas, it is still a watershed. And we have to address the more we impact in terms of infrastructure and build out, the more roads, the more houses, the more structures we use, we have to consider stormwater management as a key feature. So we want to preserve or even improve our water quality. We're going to try to address water on site. So your own property, whether it's commercial, municipal, or private, and thereby preventing sedimentation and erosion on your site or potentially on other people's sites downstream. It will help retain your property value. No one wants to buy a house with a destroyed driveway because of sediment and erosion problems. No one wants to buy a lake or oceanfront property if it has huge phosphorus loads or a destroyed beach area. So again, remember that just because you don't live by water or adjacent to water doesn't mean you don't live in a watershed, and we all have to deal with stormwater management no matter where we live. So what is a rain garden? Rain gardens are part of stormwater management systems. They are both beautiful and functional. Rain gardens are shallow, vegetated landscape depressions that slow water for a short time in an effort to provide stormwater infiltration, filtration rather, native plant habitat, and effective stormwater treatment for small-scale residential or commercial drainage areas. The image that you see to the right on the slide is actually Back Bay Cove in Portland, and it was it was actually a multi-partner effort with the state, with the Cumberland County Soil Water Conservation District, with the City of Portland, the Parks and Rec. It was a multi-partner effort to put this rain garden in, and as you can see, it was an all hands on deck effort as well in order to get it done. But again, that made a lot of buy-in. It really helped people to understand, the process, and so that was one of the first and largest sort of public rain gardens in the state of Maine. So why bother with a rain garden? What is, again, let's remind what's the importance of a rain garden. You're managing stormwater at its source. if you're, most of us here would be thinking of it from a residential standpoint, though there may be municipal or business owners here, and you may want to consider such a stormwater feature for your own, for other properties as well. You're promoting infiltration again on site rather than runoff. Runoff is what's going to cause the erosion and sedimentation on your property or downstream on someone else's property. You'll decrease the velocity of water flowing from impervious surfaces almost immediately because, again, it's a depression. So it comes into this area and it immediately slows down and sinks. It allows a greater volume of water to infiltrate. You will help reduce nutrients, heavy metals, sediments, and pathogens before the water has the opportunity to enter a storm drain or other outflow area further downstream. And they're quite cost effective. Numbers, of course, with inflation being what it is, and the cost of goods a little all over the place. The average cost is $2 to $5 per square foot. Again, if you add a significant amount of labor, or you have a tricky site to access and it requires equipment or additional labor, the prices will fluctuate. But by and large, the kickback for the investment is significant. So when you're looking at nature and the natural landscape versus the built landscape, you get about 25% of shallow infiltration in a natural landscape and about 10% runoff in a natural setting. When you're looking at a fairly built out city or large urban area, you're only getting about 10% shallow infiltration with about 5%. Oh, I'm sorry, that doesn't show up very well. It's another 25% for deep infiltration, I'm sorry, on the natural landscape. So you're getting 50% of your water or more is going to be infiltrating, and then 55% is running off on impervious surfaces in a built-out landscape, and with only 15% ever infiltrating. So, you're getting a huge, and then if you have evaporation is the other factor. So, this is why rain gardens are a green infrastructure that we are trying to mimic nature in built landscapes, so that we can get closer to that 50% or greater infiltration rather than 15%. We're going to try to get as much to sort of slow and absorb in place than to run off and go elsewhere. So here we have some urban examples of rain gardens. We have we have the two upper left corners are two different examples in the Biddeford area, some of the University of New England, and looks a bit like a dry riverbed when not full. And when full, looks more like a stream or small pond. It does go on the other side of the bridge that you see sort of in the middle picture. And then to the right, the larger photo is an image of a streetscape, and it is a rain garden in the city of Portland, where you have a tree and some grasses. The inflow in the foreground for the water, and it's able to take on quite a large amount of water by comparison to the background, where you see a small patch of grass and a tree not able to absorb the same amount of water by any stretch of the imagination. And then the alternative is the lower left-hand corner, being a storm drain, I put in a dramatic photo just for the sake of illustrating what can go into a storm drain and does. A lot of things are invisible, like these chemicals and other pollutants that you can't see because of their diluted or the volume of water that's moving at once in a storm. This happens to be paint. It's latex paint, thankfully, but paint nonetheless that's going directly into the storm drain, which depending where it's located in the town will either go outflow right into a nearby stream or end up in the wastewater treatment plant and have to be processed that way. So when most stormwater drains go to the closest stream, that's kind of the rule. That's the rule as opposed to the exception. So in this case, we hope it's going to the wastewater treatment plant so that it's being, at least has some protections before it heads to the water body. But that's the alternative. So one thing that happens as well is you've got this aesthetic value. You know, you've got less impervious surface, you have increased aesthetic value, and I can tell you for sure that that the studies have shown in urban design and planning, and even in suburban landscapes, that properties that are on street tree line with mature street trees and properties with more lush or intentionally planted, kept landscapes with greenery have much higher property values and much lower turnover rates. They're the more desirable neighborhoods to live in. So having some of these rain garden features versus endless paving and storm drains is desirable from other aspects. In terms of, so you don't live in, so many of us here don't live in a highly urban area, though if you live in downtown Belfast or downtown Camden, Rockport, etc., you have an urban element that I think sometimes we forget, that there's as much impervious surface around. But then there's the rest of us that have these sort of more suburban or rural. I'm kind of on the fringes of Camden where I live. So I'm kind of bordering that urban-rural divide from a Maine standpoint. So where would we think about in stormwater management? Roads or driveway edges, as well as slopes. And of course, we have a lot of hilly terrain here in mid-coast Maine. So the image on the left is the first, is another example of a rain garden. Very different, both in terms of aesthetic and in terms of its shape. This is a roadside swale, but dug and built as a rain garden. So in the 80s, 90s, 70s, 80s, 90s, early 90s, it was very popular. What they would have done is they would have dug this out, lined it, and put in riprap. And that actually will increase the amount of heat, and it doesn't, and it decreases the amount of habitat as well. So here you get a win-win, is you can keep the temperatures moderating with the rest of the surroundings, and you can infiltrate water all along that roadside, and rather than have it rush onto the rest of the private or public properties, you can get most of it to absorb within those first few feet from the impervious surface to the permeable surfaces. So the cross section shows just a very simplified example of what a rain garden looks like subterranean. Is you dig out a very shallow and flat, you want the flat bottom. That's really kind of key. You want it to be kind of a parabolic shape, nothing V shaped. You want it nice flat bottom, because that slows the velocity and keeps the water kind of in place. And then you leave the, from the undisturbed soil, you will till a native amended soil. You'll adapt your soils based on whether or not you have clay or silty loam. And then you will put a mulch layer in. A lot of people have also done a thin layer of fabric, and then you'll do another layer of planting, a loam for planting, and then you put your plants in. But it's but you can see on the edges that there is a distinct drop, and your plants are always below. Your planting depth is always below. It's within that the rain garden, right in the berm, and then you'll mulch it with the appropriate mulch, and you'll be on your way. So what are the components when you're thinking about putting a rain garden on your property? First, you'll need an inlet. That's the area where the runoff flows into the garden. There may be a single inlet or multiple inlets, depending on the property and how many places you're trying to drain on site. You may use a downspout, a gutter extension. It could be a concrete block spillway. It could be a swale or an area of slope lawn to catch the runoff from some nearby impervious surface. The mulch is a 3-inch layer of mulch needed in the rain garden that is not covered with turf grass. The mulch will suppress the weeds and provide a suitable surface for evaporation. And your buffer is the outermost edge of your rain garden. The purpose of the buffer is to slow the runoff entering the rain garden and to trap some sediments. It's essentially a little lip around, an intentional edge, if you will, around your rain garden. The stormwater storage area is that empty space above your base, which will hold the stormwater for a certain amount of time. You generally want to get the water to drain within about 24 hours. And the base of the rain garden is that shallow flat depression to the top of the mulch, and as it should be as level as possible to prevent areas of excess ponding. The sloped base can lead to erosion throughout the garden. Again, which is what we're trying to prevent, right? You've got a berm, which is constructed mound of earth that acts as the barrier for the garden. And your weir is the notch or low point on the berm where any excess precipitation, if you've got that 6 or 8 inch storm that just comes hammering in, it's highly probable that you will fill to capacity your rain garden, and that's okay. And just like you build a pond with a weir or the spillway, you would do the same with your rain garden. You need a little place for it to overflow safely. It could be on any number of, it could be just on grass, it could be on another surface, but you definitely want to have like a place for the overflow to go, because you don't want to lose that berm or that buffer area. So here's a cross section of a rain garden. Again, you have your slope, which pitches into the rain garden and connects to the buffer. You have your inlet, and that's the area where the runoff flows into the rain garden. It could be, again, a single or multiple inlets. And you've got your buffer area here. It's the outermost section of the rain garden. So it's still that toe of slope. It's not your flat surface area yet. And you've got your mulch that covers the top. And now here is sort of the base of your rain garden, that flat surface area, which will have a stormwater storage up to this dotted line. If you draw it across, you can see, yep, meets the dot over here. So you've got all this capacity. And yes, some of the plants will get completely inundated, but that's okay. You choose plants that are adapted for wetlands and or in occasional flooding, of which there are dozens and dozens to choose. And then this is your berm that acts as the barrier. And one place in there's got to be that one low place in the design where you have that overflow. Now, the place that we most commonly think about when we think of rain gardens, especially from a residential standpoint, is roof runoff. So you're only going to be able to do infiltrate or build a rain garden for as much of the surface area of your roof as is being drained in said direction. So you may have 2 or 4 sides to your roof, but you're only going to measure and calculate the section that your gutter or other drain is going to put into your area. So this is a large commercial site. They're looking to put a rain garden here. So they're going to calculate the square footage of this surface area was 7,881 feet. And you're going to divide it by 20, which is the calculation that you want to use if you want a depth of 6 inches for ponding. If you want a 3-inch ponding, you'll divide it by 10, your total square foot. And you come up with, for this large, I mean, this is a very large commercial building, then you need a rain garden of just under 400, so 394 square feet rain garden with a 6-inch depth to take the runoff from this section of the pond. So the calculations aren't, you want to do the calculations if you're really looking to put a rain garden in from and for any impervious surface or as much impervious surface areas as you can get, but particularly for your roof, you want to make sure that you're actually going to get the volume that you need. So this is a house that is in the process of having a rain garden put in, and there's 2 roof lines, this roof line here and this one here, feeding into this gutter system, and it is going to come out and go underground and into a newly constructed rain garden area. So this is the outflow, because again, they didn't want it over the ground. There's a lot of surface area, and every site is different. So this is very rectilinear, it's very narrow and long. So they have other uses on site. So you're going to have to figure out a way to construct a rain garden to fit this site. Again, every rain garden that we've seen so far looks different. This one is no exception. It's important to remember, though, when you're starting anything, especially if you're going to have heavy equipment in, if you're doing it all by shovel, you get a little bit of leeway, but anytime you get equipment on site, please remember best practice, whether you use silt fence, as was used here, to protect the intermittent stream behind it. Even if there's no intermittent stream, you have neighbors, you have habitat, you have lots of other things, your own property to protect. Kind of keep the construction area tight and make sure that you protect the surroundings. So in this case, silt fence was easy to put in, silty loam, quick to put up, but you could use erosion control mulch. And they also have these socks, which are these tubes, this permeable tubes that you fill essentially with erosion control or other mulch and pin in place. And that's a possibility as well. But always make sure, no matter what kind of construction you're doing, that you're securing your site. So again, dealing with a really narrow spot, have to think about a spillway because you want to slow that velocity. So the shape, again, is going to be determined by the space available. So as you can see, it's going to be kind of ovoid or rectilinear. And this is just another example, because I'm always talking best practices of all kinds. You you've got this, the scope of your erosion control barrier needs to exceed the scope of work. So if you're, if it ends here, it still needs to go out, you know, it needs to go out beyond. So think of it as giving an area a hug. You know, you want anything that you're working on needs to be kind of inside that hug. You need to be able to create a barrier within there. So that way, no matter which way the water flows on a site, you're protecting the surrounding areas. So here you can see it's starting to get dug out. This is erosion control mulch, if you're not familiar with it. And the amount, you can make these as fancy as you want. You could make them as formal as you want. You want to make sure that it fits your particular site. You always just want to make sure that you've got the right calculations, so you're addressing your volume of runoff. But you can reduce the size of your rain garden by nearly 30%. And the statistics say that you can get up to 90% of the runoff. So it could be a much smaller garden than you anticipate. So if the calculations came up with 400 square feet, you know, you could probably put in, you know, a 100 square, you know, or 150 square foot and still get a huge volume of rainwater infiltrated. So these are just guidelines. Every one looks a little different. So the point of entry, it depends. So this is gonna, because it's coming in through a pipe versus a dugout swale, then you want to make sure that you are addressing the velocity, and there's going to be a significant, fairly good drop here. So there'll be a deeper section to this garden at the point of entry, almost like a catch basin or a deeper portion, and then it'll be dug to the shallow area, to the flat area. As you can see, it's still under construction. Thankfully, it's silty loam, so it's hand dug and molded in place. And this is a clethra. Someone's impatient and is starting to plant, even though the garden's not done. And this is, it's still under construction, but this was an excellent photo to show one heavy rainstorm, all the runoff from the roof was collected in one place. So this is just kind of was the first time that the thing was dug out, and the first heavy rainfall. The weir, so the point of entry is over here, and it has a little spillway down to the bottom. And then it will have a secondary, the weir comes out across here, we'll have a secondary kind of dry rock bed, and then the final exit will be into the grassy area on the back side. And again, the whole time until everything's done, the silt vents or erosion control barrier remains in place. So that is the quick version of how to put in a rain garden and what kind of the steps are in the process. I'm happy to go into a little bit more detail or answer questions as we get to the end. I wanted to make sure that I had an opportunity to discuss some of the other storm water management issues and things that can be addressed on site pretty quickly. This is the same property, and you can see there's a deck above. And for anybody who's had a deck on the sort of second story or with a walkout, you've probably seen the corduroying effect that can occur. So it's a little bit like having a faulty roof, if you will, because it creates all these ridges up and down. So this was leveled. There was a permeable landscape, a high quality landscape fabric, and several inches of crushed stone was placed down. And that way, again, whether it's going across or infiltrating, It's taking all the rainwater coming off of the deck and it's infiltrating it directly beneath. And it's not eroding the property or the base underneath the deck anymore. So rain gardens are really for large, impervious surfaces. Where you've got like roofs, as we talked about, street roads, a lot of sort of more urban, if you will, more infrastructure. There's other ways on properties that you have to address stormwater runoff, and there's roofs without gutters. So how do you do that? You think about putting in a drip edge. This is a cottage on a beautiful, pristine, good high water quality lake up in the county, and it was hand dug, lined with in landscape fabric, and essentially it's an infiltration trench is what you're doing, but that's what a drip edge is. And so you look for that line that gets beaten down over and over and over and over again, and you go several inches on either side, and it really depends on if you've got a real narrow, you've got just a real small amount of erosion. I always try to triple the amount. So 8 inches is about as narrow as I ever do a drip edge, and 24 inches or more is not uncommon depending on the water load. And of course, what you're doing is getting all of that infiltrated before, in this case, it gets to the lake. You have driveways and paths. You can get the channeling is a really common stormwater concern, happens all the time. This is in a more urban landscape, but there's a stream right through here. And then here's a more rural setting. There's quite a long stretch of slope here, and the water actually carries across from the hill here across the road, created a little bit of a channeling across the road, and then is digging out down the edge of the road. So you want to think about putting in things like water bars, which will cross over at a diagonal from the high to the low point across driveways, particularly like camp roads or seasonal homes, or putting in a rubber razor water bar on a dirt driveway to kind of move that water off those steep sections is really a good way to conserve and preserve those roads or driveways. And then you notice that neither here, so if there was a small rain garden or a vegetated buffer rather than just grass, you would not be getting nearly the amount. You might get a little channeling, but you wouldn't get nearly the amount of channeling that you've gotten here, because it would, all this rainwater coming down and across this surface would be trapped and infiltrated before it gets to this lower portion where the driveway is located. And the same thing, if there was a ditch along this side of this road that was parabolic shaped, like those rain gardens, nice low, then it would slow that water down. And while it wouldn't be a rain garden per se, because there's so much slope, you're still going to get it moving below this, having it come off the road and coming below and moving slowly. And again, putting in a crown on this road will help as well. Another thing to mention with driveways and paths in terms of addressing stormwater management is having culverts that are sized properly for the site. Preferably if you can afford or find the open bottom culverts. So essentially it's like, looks like, just as it's described, essentially kind of like a bridge or a U culvert that they heel in differently, and they leave a natural bottom. The other thing that you can consider is what they call a rock sandwich for locations that are used infrequently. You can actually temporarily dam both sides of a stream or a pond area that might occasionally overflow into a wetland, and rebuild the road crossing so that it's wrapped with a geotextile and then filled with a large number of angular aggregate. And all those open areas through the aggregate will actually allow the water to flow more naturally and still give you the strength that you need for driving across the crossing. Buffer plantings, these are huge, whether it's freshwater sites, as is on this cottage property where we saw the drip line. Again, absolutely pristine water quality. You can see right to the bottom. It's just beautiful view. They've got a gorgeous buffer of a local or state park across the way. And it's kind of a U-shaped lake. And so they've just kind of suffered the consequence of time, which has had a lot of wind and wave action. And so this embankment has deteriorated over time, and trees have fallen but not been replaced. They just hadn't realized. It was just kind of like, oh, good, there's more of a view, or oh, we're only here a few weeks a year. And so, no one was being intentionally neglectful. But they had the opportunity to have a survey, an assessment done, and it was determined that they were losing a little too much of the embankment. So it was suggested that they increase the buffer plantings and find other ways to reduce the flow coming from their site, as well as to mitigate the wave action. So it's been completely revegetated with hundreds of plants, and over time they'll fill in completely, and they'll help retain that embankment. And any activity, man-made or otherwise, that's coming from the upland will be slowed and blocked, the water as well as any non-point pollutants by those plants. And the same is true for shorelines on the ocean side. As you can see, this particular section of shoreline is pretty exposed, and this is the last point before entry. So this is the last opportunity to stop any of those non-point source pollutants, any of that heavy amounts of runoff. And so this is an opportunity, even a barrier of perennials, of native perennials or shrubs, or would be a huge improvement to slow some water and infiltrate some water before it gets to the ocean. I completely understand that not everybody wants to put all dense forest of trees in front of their property, but there are hundreds of plants to choose from that are 5 feet to 5 inches that will do a tremendous job helping with stormwater management. Slopes. So you can mulch a slope, and that is one way of helping with stormwater management. They have done that here. This is erosion control mulch. And this is a good lesson in sometimes you try something and it doesn't work. So there's enough foot traffic and enough of a slope that it has, it's actually not an effective sediment erosion control measure. So what is needed here is vegetation. Sometimes erosion control mulch is good, and sometimes it's just not enough. So I always ask, is grass the best choice on a slope? And more often than not, if you're talking about stormwater management, it's probably not the best choice. Not the steeper the slope, the more that statement is true. So grass, it can be easy for maintenance in some spots, but the steeper the slope, the harder it is to mow. So you can tell for sure, because it's so flat and because of this lovely yellow hydrant, that this is all impervious surface. This is a road right here. And you have quite a bit of slope with what essentially is little behind it. So why mow this section? Why not pollinator meadow? Why not a mass of native roses? There's absolutely no habitat value here. And I can assure you that the amount of erosion on this site versus one with pollinator meadow or a bed of roses is there's no comparison, just none. And this is not infiltrating any of the same amount of water that the others would. Some people like something fancier. You want something, maybe grass isn't your thing, and nor is a meadow. Some people, aesthetic, that's a little too messy. That's fine. You can do a very formal shrub border. You can do something very high design. You can put pathways. I would always suggest on slopes that you put in something that's permeable. So whether it's landscape timbers with crushed stone terraced up the slope, or erosion control mulch path, or in this case, brick. The sky's the limit. There's endless choices. New construction or renovations, I always try to recommend that people consider only exposing the land around new construction or renovations that's absolutely necessary, and it's always a lot less than you think. Then erosion control and other planting should match the severity of the slope. I like grass on this slope is not the appropriate stormwater management choice. The steeper the slope, the bigger the increase of erosion and runoff. Also, of course, it'll be a lot of water issues. This image was taken standing on the sidewalk, and behind the sidewalk is a town road, and behind the town road is a bunch of building other structures and parking lots, and behind that's the ocean. So, this could cause a lot of erosion, a lot of sedimentation, without necessarily intentionally, not being mean-spirited, just, this is not like the best approach. So a solution would be to take that rain garden in the form of a swale and contour these gardens into, could do one at the base, one halfway across the slope. You could put in formal or informal paths all the way down. Again, the sky's the limit, but there are enormous opportunities in this square footage to infiltrate all of the water before it gets to the sidewalk. So how you're going to do this using native plants is I'm always going to promote the use of native plants. Why native plants? They are better adapted to your site. They're adapted to the area, the climate, and they are, because they have adapted over generations and generations long beyond what human generations are, the soils, the pests, so on and so forth, they've also know how to grow deeper, stronger, thicker root systems. Now, am I saying you should never have a spirea or a daylily or a fountain grass in your garden, or you can't tuck a few in your rain garden? No. But I do think it's important that when you're looking from a maintenance perspective, when you're looking from a habitat perspective, when you're looking to get essential from an economic perspective, kind of getting the biggest bang for your buck, you will always go farther with natives. So I call this the roots to shoots ratio. If you only have 3 inches of turf grass roots, you're only going to get 3 inches of soil retention and infiltration. So if you have, if you can put in a tree, you've got that whole canopy to think about in terms of how far those roots are going to go. And in most cases, the studying is showing that trees, even shrubs, and are showing that our evidence is that the roots beneath the surface are actually extending far beyond the plant structure above the surface more often than not. So again, sometimes, so when and where you can put on those steep slopes, the trees and the shrubs, you really are going to get a lot of soil retention, stormwater management. And I would be remiss if I didn't say where you could buy these native plants. So this is we're not super good at soil water districts at plugging ourselves, but here's our little plug. We do have a native plant sale. It's also edible. So we have fruit trees, berry bushes, etc., which you can order online. We have one of the biggest plant sales for soil water conservation districts in the state, and it probably is the biggest. I specialize in curating natives, as well as the long tried and true and loved blueberries and apples and so on and so forth. But our pre-order plant sale goes through April 18th, and our curbside pickup is Friday, May 12th and Saturday, May 13th, with a cash and carry on Saturday, May 13th. So that's one of many places. As you would know, our nurseries will carry a number of natives. They're becoming more of the it thing than they ever were. Though I've worked with native plants my entire career, so I never knew that they were in vogue or out of vogue. But I'm happy to have many, many more of them prevalent in the landscape and the designed and built man-made landscapes. And so that's one of the places that I would encourage you to consider buying. It supports our conservation district and our education outreach efforts like this evening. And then on the opposite side of stormwater management, if rain garden's just a little too much for you and just a little too big of a project, and you're an avid gardener, I certainly would encourage you to put in a rain barrel if you have a rain. And you don't even have to have gutters. If you have gutters, this is a great way of reusing some of your water. And you can get about 55-gallon capacity rain gardens. They come with mosquito mesh covers. That's one concern a lot of people have. Oh, I don't want a rain barrel because I don't want mosquitoes. They're covered, and many of them come from nearly recycled materials attached to a standard garden hose, and are a great way of recycling and repurposing water right on your property. Mm-hmm. So that is rain gardens and other water management techniques just before 7 o'clock.
All right, Rebecca, thank you. There are a few questions. Are you ready for some questions?
I hope so.
Okay.
There we go. I can see people now.
Okay. So Debbie asks, could rain gardens help areas of standing water by absorbing the water? On her property, she doesn't have runoff. Instead, they have ponding. And they have swales to capture sump pumps from our neighbors, but it ends up in a pond by the road. Our yard is lower than the road with the construction. Go on. Go ahead. There's a lot.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I have a colleague who's since retired, but I thought it was like the greatest little quip. She was like, plant that puddle. And so yeah, absolutely. Plant that puddle, if you will, or that ponding area. You can actually kind of formalize it, right? Dig it out a little wider, create that berm, make sure you get that inflow and then get the outflow. But yeah, absolutely. That's a great area to better infiltrate and direct the infiltration on your site. And yes, some pumps, the drainage from some pumps, they should all have rain gardens or some kind of additional catchment, because they all get tons of channeling and yeah, or send it shooting off to the neighbors. So by all means, yeah, it's a good solution for that spot.
All right, thank you. Fred asked, could you speak to the issue of maintenance due to silt and organic matter accumulation? I guess in a rain garden, he means.
Yeah, so yeah, and the same thing with like the drip edge and other things. So it you know, you're 10, 15, 20 years out, but at some point you may, just like the front garden bed that you planted 15 or 20 years ago that doesn't look quite as good as it used to, you may need to cut back your perennials, or what, you know, or divide out and pull some stuff out and dig out. You know, there is going to be some siltation. I mean, that's part of what it's doing, right? It's infiltrating. So there's always a little bit of maintenance. But over, you know, I think for the amount of maintenance that you have to do, it's mostly like maintaining a regular garden, and then every now and then, like a regular garden needs that extra zhuzh, you know, to get you through the next decade or more. So nothing is maintenance free.
Of course not. Yeah, okay, thanks. So Linda asked, can you define what a water bar is?
Oh, a water bar. Yeah, so a water bar is essentially a slight protrusion. Usually, sometimes it's with like a cedar log, sometimes it's using like old recycled tires. They have some other, and you can Google it, it'll come up, but and it creates like a lip or a little diverter. It's you kind of think of it as like a mini speed bump. You know, you'll feel it, you'll be like boom as you drive over it, but it actually just helps move the water. If you hike at all, or when as you've hiked, sometimes they put water bars in, and they're almost like little, instead of being up, they're little swales, and sometimes they're little berms to help move the water off trails. That's another place you see them, but those are water bars. They're diverters. So angled from high to low to move a section of water off the trail, driveway, etc. I hope that's somewhat explicit. I can send you, I actually have a handout, but I can send everybody. I can link that.
Okay, cool, thanks. So there were no more questions in the chat, but I've made it so you can unmute yourself and ask a question if anybody wants to go ahead. Oh, actually, somebody wants you to show the slide again of the cross section of the garden.
Oh, okay.
Of the rain garden. Yeah, that was interesting.
Okay.
And while you're backing up to it, I just want to ask, the Waldo County Soil Water Conservation District also has a plant sale, correct? I just thought
they do have a plant sale, and she's
Alita.
Which one do you want? The one I just flashed by, or the
cross section is what she asked.
This one, this cross section, or?
Well, I don't know. She, yes, that's the one.
Yes, that's the one. Okay, good.
Right.
I like, oops, I don't know which one, because there's a couple of cross sections it showed. I realized after the fact.
Hi, thank you. Could you also show the one that's got the 2 slides? It was like a 2 half.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you for
yeah, no worries. There's one. Let me know when you're ready for the next one.
Ready?
Oh, geez, that was cool.
Huh.
Thanks. I was just doing a screenshot so that I could look at it and
reference. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, these are, because remember, you're only doing, you know, you're going to dig deeper than that 3 to 6 inch of volume that you're going to want to infiltrate, you know, at that flat bottom, but because you want to have that base, you know, created, and you want to stir up a little bit beneath. But by and large, you know, these are very like small garden sized, manageable, you from a residential standpoint, unless you have the really monstrous house. But commercial sites are different. That's a huge volume of water, and you've got more structure. But a lot of rain gardens could be, depending on your soil type, but in terms of size, are pretty tangible, individual, projects.
I have a question. Do a lot of the landscape design and landscape companies in our area here in Midcoast, are they knowledgeable about installing rain gardens and water management techniques? Are you often asked to advise them?
I think it's all over the place, if I'm being honest.
Okay.
Just as their knowledge base of native plants is all over the place, just as their knowledge base of pruning. I'm not going to say anything good, bad, or indifferent, but my personal and my professional experience up and down, the Midcoast is pretty variable. So, yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So somebody says, can you advise, how do you get an assessment done and who do we contact?
So depending on which county you're in, I would, because Alita is more than capable. She's my colleague, and she and I work very often together and very happily together so she's at the Waldo County Soil and Water Conservation District. She would definitely be a go-to gal for that. She's not in the country until the end of February, so don't call her this week. She won't answer. But you can leave a message. So if you're in Knox or Lincoln counties, I would be happy to do that. And then if we're busy, or overfull or, overtaxed for a particular time of year, then we can politely pass you along to someone within our network.
Okay. So this person asked that you didn't talk much about plants to use, although you did mention using native plants. Are there any that you could suggest? And
yeah, so there are endless lists. So we have on our website, and as does Waldo, I'm sure, plants for wet locations, plants for moderately wet locations. So, your lobelia, the perennial lobelias, any of your dogwoods, shrubs would be good for those sites. Clethra, which is a summer sweet. I could do a whole talk on plants for your plant that puddle scenario, plant that green garden. You could do Joe Pye weed, your echinacea, some of your rudbeckias. Some are better than others in terms of the rudbeckias. Any of your grasses and any of your wetland grasses and sedges. And if you want to do an all forbs, all perennial rain garden, I would strongly recommend putting in some grasses and sedges, because remember your native meadows and wetlands are about 60 to 70% grasses and forbs naturally. Like there's a lot with, that's the structural element that hold up all those forbs. Otherwise they could get floppy. And you want it to look as good too, right? You'll enjoy it more. You'll maintain it more if it looks good. So yeah, there's tons and tons of plants. I could ramble on and on and on.
Yeah, but it's good to know that it's on your website.
There's plant lists on the website, and I'm happy if you want to give me the list, Brenda. I can send out a mass email of very specific, links to the rain gardens and other plants. But ironweed is another great plant. I mean, you get me talking plants and we'll be here for another hour.
Yeah, okay. I'll do my best to grab all the emails. It sometimes takes me a little while to get around to that, but I'll try to do it, I promise. One more question about plants is, what types of plantings in a catch pond that is full of water several months of the year? Do you have a suggestion for that? Any of your shrub willows, your pussy willows, your winterberries, it's always, if you can tolerate the alders, I don't know how, I don't know if it's on the edge of something and you're okay with a little bit of spread.
Again, the clethras are a good choice. Buttonbush, that's a great one. Loves to sit in water. That's Cephalanthus. So that's a great plant choice. Again, your iris are good plant choices. Your blue flag iris, not the yellow flag iris. Those are invasive. And any kinds of sedges.
All right, I said that was the last question, but now this really is the last question. How do you recommend catching water from a gutterless garden? I don't understand the question, actually. I thought that was going to say gutterless house, but
so the drip edge is how from a gutterless house, or could be commercial, could be any property. Right. The drip edge is kind of the first go-to. If there's a lot of slope, if it's a roof line, then it kind of drops and quickly runs. That's where like putting in, either a buffer planting along the top, and it doesn't even have to necessarily be a rain garden, but it's something that will block, because remember the rain is going to actually hit. And believe it or not, little stems and leaves, all that material is going to stop a raindrop and slow it down or make it move around it or infiltrate, right? Some of it will flow and some of it will go underground. So I would say stopping it as close to the source as you can is the best. When you put your rain gardens in, they suggest between 6 and 10 feet away from your house. They want you to keep, because you're infiltrating water. So they don't want you to infiltrate water too close to the structure for obvious reasons.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think that's a good amount of questions. And I thank you so much for your presentation. Really informative. And I know you could talk for longer on plants. Maybe we'll do it again.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. I appreciate you.
Yeah. And I'll send you the email list as soon as I get to it, Rebecca. Okay.
Yeah, no worries. And I will follow up and send you guys some additional information to get you all excited about putting your rain gardens and or other stormwater management techniques on your own property this spring. So,
all right. Thank you. Thank you all.